Okay, folks, let's get started. Join me in prayer. Holy Father, as we study your word tonight, may the meaning be clear. May the application be honest. Help us to be changed by what we read, not simply enlightened. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
We're looking at chapters 12, 13, and 14 tonight. The seventh vision begins here in chapter 12, verse 1. This is the third and final of the three interludes in Revelation. And we're at some of the central meat of the book tonight. This is inserted between the seven trumpets and the seven bowls. And in this passage, it reinterprets some traditional images from the Old Testament and apocalyptic literature. It also provides a key to interpreting other symbols found throughout Revelation. We get more details about Christ's involvement in all of these end-time events. At the same time, we see the activity of a false trinity: the dragon, the first beast, and the false prophet. If you think back in the first interlude in chapter 7, verses 1 through 17, Christians are reminded that they were eternally sealed and protected despite end-time judgments and the persecution that came upon them. In the second interlude, in chapter 10 through chapter 11, verse 14, the church is called upon to proclaim the gospel while expecting suffering and persecution. This last interlude demonstrates how this calling is part of a larger conflict between the people of God and forces of evil, namely Satan and the world. John calls the woman and the dragon signs. Finding what they mean will help us to understand John's symbolism. The eclectic approach emphasizes that John intended his audience in AD 95 to see how the events that led up to the fall of Jerusalem and the persecution under Nero and whatnot affected them. But his intention was also to show them that God was continuing to work in their lives on into the future. As we look at this book from the perspective of the 21st century, we can see how these prophecies were fulfilled repeatedly over the centuries in broad, generalized kinds of ways. But we can also see that in the end, at the end of history, we will see these prophecies fulfilled in a very specific and very dramatic way. And so we get into chapter 12, beginning in verse 1. The imagery of the woman, the child, and the dragon. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns on his heads, 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, what are we talking about here? If you're a dispensationalist, you understand this pregnant woman to be referring to ethnic Israel, to the Jewish people. And thus they continue to see the events in this passage as an unfolding of the last half of the Great Tribulation. The woman represents in that system modern national Israel, the Jewish state. And the child refers to Christ. The child will eventually rule with a rod of iron, and this refers to his future millennial reign. Hal Lindsey understands Satan's booting out of heaven to earth to take place during the middle of the tribulation. The fleeing of the woman into the wilderness refers to an actual future remnant of Jewish people who are being persecuted by the Antichrist and must flee into southern Palestine. There are even those who've got it figured out that where they're going to go to is Petra, down south of the Dead Sea. Now, there's absolutely no biblical basis for that. And first of all, and secondly, the archaeological site of Petra, would hold a very finite number of people, even if that were indeed where they were going. So, in the dispensational scheme, the victory of the saints over their accusers is spiritual, not physical. Satan has less than 3.5 years left, and he knows that his time is short, because 1,000 years of being bound awaits him in the near future. Again, in that dispensationalist understanding, the eagle's two wings, Hal Lindsey suggests that this could be a massive airlift. And since the eagle is a symbol of the USA, it may be aircraft from the U.S. 6th Fleet stationed off the Mediterranean Sea. I'm not making this stuff up. You can read it for yourself in Hal Lindsey's writings. The flood of water may be symbolic. Hal Lindsey, however, sees this flood as a horde of men and weapons sent after the Jews by the Antichrist. God will cause an actual chasm in the earth to open up, and they will fall in. Frustrated, Satan turns his wrath toward other Great Tribulation saints. The literal 1,260 days coincides with the second half of the Great Tribulation, 3.5 years. All right, that's a dispensationalist take on this. Historic premillennial futurists agree with Christ as the designation for the child, but they don't embrace this identification of national Israel as the woman. Instead, they see the woman as true messianic believers, a remnant. John is prophesying end-time persecution. The woman's escape on two wings is John's way of assuring the church of her ultimate safety, even in the face of martyrdom. In other words, all Christians must be ready to face end-time persecution. The idealists remind us that the principal details of this section are descriptive rather than prophetical. We are temporarily ushered back in time to primordial events to give us the reason for the eternal conflict between good and evil, God and Satan. The point is that to show that Satan has tried to destroy Jesus from birth onwards. Remember Herod's slaughter of the innocents, and his temptation of Christ and his crucifixion of Christ. The idealists see the woman as representing Old Testament believers, true Israel. And that imagery, by the way, is right out of Genesis chapter 37. Joseph's dream. In verse 9 he says he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." So it's imagery that brings to mind that Old Testament passage. In the idealist scheme, they see this passage as reminding us that this struggle between God and Satan is one that goes back into prehistory. It's an ages-long struggle. Now, don't fall prey to a common misconception. It is, and I can remember seeing this misconception illustrated in cartoons when I was a kid, where the character is being tempted. And he's got an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other, and they're both whispering in his ears. That is a simplified way of illustrating something that a lot of people have falsely embraced, and that's the notion that God and Satan are co-equal opposites. It's an idea right out of Eastern mysticism. You know, the whole idea of the yin and the yang, the idea of two forces, one good, one evil. In Zoroastrian religion, which is the religion that was found in ancient Persia, the very good possibility that the wise men that came to Bethlehem may well have been Zoroastrian priests. And in the Zoroastrian religion, there are these two forces, good and evil, God and Satan. They actually use the name Satan for the evil force. And they're in an eternal conflict. And neither side ever wins. Because it's like poles of a magnet. They're equally matched. And so they have always been at war, and they always will be at war. So there are a lot of people that buy into that kind of thinking, and it's utterly false from a biblical standpoint. As the Bible teaches it, Satan is simply one more created being. And based on a theological understanding of the nature of God, Satan had to have been created sinless, because God doesn't create sin. Now, the reality is the Bible tells us almost nothing about the origins of evil. It tells us very little about the origins of Satan. There are a few hints, and there are lots and lots of elaborate theories, but most of it is theory, because what we know is precious little. But the inference is that Satan was some kind of spiritual being, an angel. It's argued by some an archangel. He may well have been the highest of the angels, or one of the highest. And the impression that, again, this is a little bit of fact and a whole lot of theory, is that Satan rebelled and took a bunch of angels with him in his rebellion. And some see this passage and this idea of the dragon knocking a third of the stars of heaven out of the heavens as a cryptic description of that primordial rebellion that happened before the creation of human beings. And if that is indeed the case, the inference is that a third of the angels of heaven followed Satan in his rebellion. Now again, this may be, but don't bet the farm on it, because we've got a little bit of fact and a whole lot of speculation. But as the idealists read this passage, they see in these verses the story of this conflict between God and Satan that is not eternal, but is very old. It had a beginning. Unlike the Zoroastrians, it didn't always happen. There was a time when there was only God. There was a time when God created a sinless universe. There was a time in which he created Satan. There was a time when Satan rebelled against God. That much we can say with confidence. The details are a little sketchy. But from that point then, there is this ages-long conflict that comes to its culmination not at some point in the future, but over 1900 years ago on a hill outside Jerusalem called Calvary, where Jesus was put to death, and for a moment Satan thought he'd won. And then God pulled the rug out from under him. Jesus came back to life. As the eclectics, and my point of view on this, I kind of shift back and forth between a premillennial futurist point of view and an eclectic one. I guess I'm more eclectic than eclectic, so I just pick and choose. They would agree that much of the symbolism mentioned is to be interpreted rather like the idealist, but they would add that historic premillennial futurist emphasis on the end time. My problem with the idealist is that too often I don't think they take seriously enough the prophetic element of this stuff, that there is at some future point a fulfillment that goes beyond anything that we've ever known historically. As I see the revelation, I see events that happen over and over again in Christian history in various and sundry ways. And so at that point, I think the idealists are on something. There have been lots of antichrists. And at some point in the future, there will be the ultimate antichrist. But every generation has seen their antichrist. Whether it was Stalin or Hitler or Mao Zedong or Saddam Hussein, pick your favorite bad guy. They all demonstrate the qualities of Antichrist. In John's day, they would have thought back to Nero, who was the first of these Antichrist. They might well have thought about the Emperor Domitian, who was currently the reigning Antichrist when this letter was written. And there have been plenty of other good candidates. And at any point in that process, for the Christian generation that is alive in that day, they can look to whoever that person is, and they can know one of two things is going to happen. Either this guy is going to finally play out his line and die, and this time of intense persecution will pass. Or this is the guy, and Jesus is coming back, and this time of intense persecution is going to pass. Either way, it's a win-win in the long run. But the same thing that John is telling to those 7 churches has been true all through Christian history. That persecution and opposition to the gospel is part and parcel with what it means to be a Christian. That every generation has the responsibility of sharing boldly their Christian witness, and every generation is going to get pushback. Sometimes it will be mild, sometimes it will be intense, usually it will be somewhere in between. But the book has relevance and meaning for wherever you are in that spectrum of Christian history. Most eclectics view this fall of Satan. Some see it as referring back to that primordial event where Satan rebelled in millennia past. Others see it as representing that most important of all battles between God and Satan, the one that took place at Calvary. And this is where Satan was defeated. So, with all the evil in this world, with all the wickedness, with the horrible headlines that you're going to be confronted with every time you check the news, you need to be reminded that we are fighting a defeated foe. He's still capable of great evil, but his ultimate power has been taken away from him. The power of death, the power of judgment, the power to accuse the believers. Remember in Job, the image of Satan before the throne of heaven, accusing God's people? Satan can't play that role anymore. He's persona non grata in heaven. He's not allowed in. And so our great accuser cannot accuse us any longer once we come under the shelter of a faith relationship with Jesus Christ. And that's huge. Obviously, this red dragon, whatever your way of approaching the book, is Satan. And the child, some interpret this as Israel, some interpret it as the people of God through history. And the child is, by all accounts, to be understood as referring to Jesus. Okay, verses 7 through 12. War in heaven. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, and the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, he was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of Christ has come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they loved not their lives, even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. Now, some futurists again see a battle in the cosmic realm happening during the final Great Tribulation period. I think it's better to understand this as recapping what has already been talked about in verse 4. This is, again, recapitulation. It's taking what is said in verse 4, it's expanding on that and giving more detail. The war in heaven in which Michael fights Satan is a cosmic spiritual battle waged at the key moment in history, the cross, the resurrection, and the ascension of Jesus. However, and again, this is typical of the way the Bible deals with issues of prophecy. I think you can read in this and see both a future, a present, and a series of past fulfillments of it. I think it does speak of the primordial past, of the origin of evil, of Satan's rebellion. I think it certainly deals with the great battle that took place during Jesus' earthly ministry. And again, there were a series of attacks on Jesus from his infancy all the way through the crucifixion. And I think there is a future fulfillment of this. Because what we've got in the book of Revelation is the culmination of this ages-long conflict between good and evil, between God and Satan and his forces. And history is going to end with a bang. If nothing else comes through in this book, that ought to. Maybe Hal Lindsey's right. It's going to be a nuclear bang. The war on earth. Chapter 12, verses 13 through 17. This passage is an expansion and a recapitulation of verse 6, where it talks about the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared for her by God. In these 13 through 17, that takes that and expands upon it. These symbols, the woman, the eagle, whatnot, reflect great truths. The eagle represents God's divinely sent messenger, his strength, his protection. The wilderness symbolizes a place of refuge and deliverance, yet also reflects a time of trial and testing for God's people. Now, we got a huge biblical example of this. The wilderness wanderings of Israel after they left Egypt. They left Egypt to get out of a place of great danger and suffering. So the wilderness in that sense was a source of deliverance. But it was also a source of testing and trial. For 40 years they were tested and tried there. And so we get this two-sided image of how God works with his people. On the one hand, he is protecting us. On the other hand, he is allowing us to suffer temptation and sometimes persecution. It's two sides of the same coin. We see it illustrated in Israel's history. We see it in this passage as well. Don't fall into the trap of trying to literalize these symbols. You know, John's not talking about the air wing of the U.S. 6th Fleet pulling Jews out and taking them to safety. When you do that, first of all, you miss out on the powerful symbolism. You know, far richer and greater is to see this as a symbol of God's protective hand than to try to figure out which Air Force unit's involved. It also it diminishes things. You know, this image of the dragon's river of water, it symbolizes persecution, destruction, and deceit. You know, a veritable flood of lies, deceit, and deception, the effort to destroy God's people, and it's not talking about flash flooding in the desert. You read this passage rightly, and you come away with the powerful truth: Satan may be successful in killing my body, he cannot kill my soul. If you literalize these symbols, unless you happen to be one of those involved in that final generation, it really has no meaning for you at all in the way you live your life. So I would much rather read Revelation and find from it instruction and inspiration that will see me through my day than as speculative information about something that I may or may not live to witness. If we symbolize these events, they mean everything to us. They become immediately relevant, and they demand that we follow God today, each day, every day, in spite of whatever Satan may throw at us. You know, that's something you can put to work in your life. The dragon has been defeated, and he's frustrated and angry about it. First, he was driven out of his place in heaven. Next, he failed in his attempt to devour the child when he tried to destroy the woman. The dragon's last recourse is to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments, who hold to the testimony of Jesus. These offspring can only be the Christian communities to which John was writing, and by extension, to every Christian who's lived since. Any other interpretation makes no sense for those who receive these letters. If it doesn't make sense to the churches in Ephesus and Smyrna and all the others, then there's something wrong with that theory. Okay, we're 12 chapters into this book. You might rightly have asked, what has all this to do with me? Well, here you've got your answer. The major point of chapter 12 is that Satan has been defeated in heavenly battle and now is going to take out his anger upon God's children on earth. The Christian life is not meant to be peaceful with nothing but earthly prosperity, no matter what you may have seen on TBN prosperity gospel is heresy, folks. Flee from it. It has nothing to do with what God teaches. On the contrary, all who find Christ face the wrath of Satan. We become his targets of opportunity. Our victory will be found in our obedience to Christ's commands, our faithful witness in this life. Spiritual warfare is all too often neglected in the modern Christian's life. Bottom line is, most of us, if we were absolutely honest, would admit what we really want to do is to live in some Christian Switzerland, some neutral zone, where we can just mind our business and grow our flowers and ski in the wintertime and, sing the songs of Sound of Music and live happily thereafter. And let the world fight its battles outside the borders. Well, you don't have that option if you're going to be following Jesus. You're in it. You're in it up to your neck. Revelation 12 reminds us that we should study the doctrine of demonology in order to prepare us for the end. This stuff is real. The enemy is real, and he's after us. It also gives us a better perspective on persecution. Not only is suffering a special fellowship with Christ, as Philippians 3 and Colossians 1 describes it, it's also Satan's defeat in spiritual warfare. Our perseverance is what defeats Satan. Every time a Christian is persecuted and perseveres, even if it leads to his martyrdom, Satan is defeated. See, we are so hung up in our materialistic, time-constrained view of reality. I can remember events back to sometime in the late 50s. I was born December 29th, 1953. The very earliest memory I have was in July of 56 when my brother was born. And it's just a fragmentary little piece of memory. I think of a few other things, but it was after I was in school in the first grade that most of my memories are really vivid. But stuff that happened before I was born, my rational brain admits it happened, but experientially it's just a theory. World War II was the movies I saw as a kid. Same with the Korean War. All that stuff happened, as far as I'm concerned, in a different universe, because I wasn't a part of it. And so I'm very constrained in my thinking to the 61 plus years in which I've actually been alive and walking around on this planet, and not all of that even. I believe in a spiritual reality beyond the material, but I've never seen an angel. I've never heard a disembodied voice speak to me. I've never had what I would call a supernatural dream. I believe those things do happen and have happened, but it's a faith commitment on my part. My eyes, my ears, my senses have not experienced that. So I'm real limited. I'm limited by time, my little piece of time at that, and I'm limited to the universe that I can touch and smell and feel and sense. And then I think about God, who is not constrained by time, who is eternal, who has always been, who always will be. I have used this illustration before. It's not perfect, but it's the best I can come up with. if we were to imagine time as a 3 or 4 inch straight line drawn on a piece of white typing paper. All the events sequentially from the first moment to the end of history. God's a piece of paper. He's everything all the way around it. Of course, my model is inadequate right away because it's 2-dimensional, not 3-dimensional. Imagine a toothpick and a block of ice. God is not constrained by time. Every moment of time is present reality for him, which gives you a whole new understanding on how you pray. Because one of the challenges Christians have is, well, if God already knows what's going to happen, then what difference does it make what I pray now? But from God's perspective, your prayer today and his answer a week from now is all present reality. So you really do affect the future in that sense. But we're so constrained by that material time perspective that it's hard for us to get a hold of the idea that physical life and death in the greater scheme of things is really small stuff. If we accept the notion that the Bible teaches that we are created for all of eternity forward, the trials and tribulations of this little life is so small as to be almost beyond measurement. What is 100 years compared to 1 billion? Yet we spend all our energy, or nearly all of it, focused on this life, these few hard years. God sees this from a different point of view. 2 beasts wage war against the church. Chapter 13, first 18 verses. The first beast, otherwise known as the Antichrist. The preterists see the sea that's described here, a beast rising out of the sea, as representing the Gentiles. The beast in question is none other than the Roman Empire itself, or perhaps specifically the Emperor Nero. Dispensationalists also see the sea as Gentile nations. This reflects Gentile confusion and disorientation at end-time events that are unfolding around the world. In their understanding, the beast has to be a Jew. The sea must refer to the Mediterranean Sea. This beast then represents the revived pagan imperial empire of Rome during the Great Tribulation period that asserts its authority throughout the world, but specifically it is the Antichrist, a charismatic leader who owns the traits of all of Daniel 7's beasts. According to Hal Lindsey, the 10 horns refer to the 10 nations who will form a confederacy in which the Antichrist will rule during the Great Tribulation. This confederacy, Lindsey believes, is the contemporary European Common Market, now known as the European Union. When Hal Lindsey was writing the late great Planet Earth, there were 10 nations in the Common Market. Unfortunately for his theory, there are 28 nations in it now. See what happens when you spend all your energy trying to figure out from your newspaper how the stuff in the Bible is going to be fulfilled. Because the newspaper is not static. That stuff changes all the time. And so this idea that there's going to be a resurrection of the Roman Empire so that this stuff can be literally fulfilled is fraught with all kinds of difficulty. This first beast, this Antichrist, says on one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worship the dragon, for he has given his authority to the beast. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? Tim LaHaye says, in all probability, the Antichrist will appear to be a Gentile. And like Adolf Hitler and others who feared to reveal their Jewish blood, will keep his Jewish ancestry a secret. The Bible teaches that he will be a Greco-Roman Grecian Jew, a composite man representing the peoples of the earth. This technically qualifies him to be the embodiment of all evil men. Yeah, I have to suggest that LaHaye is reading a whole lot into the Bible at this point. Historic premillennial futurists emphasize the connection between Daniel 7, Rome, and Revelation 17 on a symbolic level. Thus, for John, the beast was indeed the Roman Empire. I think, from the perspective of the people who first got these letters, they're not trying to figure out about some future empire 2,000 years into the future. They're going to be looking at what's around them, and what's around them was Rome. And the characteristics of the Roman Empire in the late part of the first century beautifully fit what is being described here. But as we look at this from a different perspective, we can see that it is more than what they saw in the ancient Roman Empire. The beast has always been and will be in its final intensified manifestation the deification of secular authority. Now let's think about that. What do we have with the beast? What do we have with the false prophet? We have a dangerous marriage of church and state, of religion and secular power. You think about the world's number one bugaboo right now, ISIS. I mean, you want a group that epitomizes evil. I can't think of a better one. And what do they represent? They represent a dangerous, malignant combining of secular, military, state authority and religious belief. And it is a dangerous combination. What we have in this description of the situation in the final years of history is the ultimate dangerous amalgam of political and religious power. We can look through history, as the idealists would, and see repeated incarnations of this kind of political, social evil. And there's lots and lots and lots of examples. When I was a college student, one of my majors was history. And I remember doing a major research paper on the Spanish Inquisition. And it was pretty creepy, folks. Hitler could have taken lessons. The SS could have taken lessons from Torquemada on how to go about inflicting pain on a human being. They were masters of it. And it was all done in the name of God. This beast rising out of the sea represents persecuting power, especially the power of a demonized state. The emphasis is first on John's audience, but it can be traced throughout history. The beast is the governmental incarnation of Satan himself. The fact that Daniel's 7 successive world empires seem to be consolidated here reveals that John's vision indicates all anti-Christian governments throughout time. Now again, in the time of the writing of this book, there was a popular theory going around, a myth, that Nero was going to be reborn. In Latin, they called it Nero redivivus, or reborn Nero. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that John believed this. But when he wrote this to those 7 churches, this was something that they all would have known about. You know, it was as widespread as some of the other silly myths that we've known in our life. You know, stuff like the Bermuda Triangle, or pick your favorite silly internet myth. It was real popular. It was well known. Whether they believed it or not, you know, when you think about an evil, powerful, secular head appearing to die and then be reborn, that's the kind of thing they would have thought of. John is telling his readers, and every reader thereafter, if you think Nero was bad, wait till you see the guy who's coming. So once again, wherever you are in history, whatever evil political despot happens to be on the scene, the news is the same. Either this is not the guy, he's going to die and things will get better, or he is the guy and Jesus is coming back and things are getting better. There is a call here for patient endurance and faithfulness. In verse 10, there is a quotation from Jeremiah 15:2. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword, he must be slain. Here is a call for endurance and faith of the saints. This is a very significant little prophetic oracle that is often overlooked, but you cannot overestimate its importance. In this one little verse, John has encapsulated how we are to face the persecutions that come upon us. Bottom line is, some people are going to suffer. Some people are going to die. And we're not talking about the unbelieving multitudes. We're talking about believers. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Tough times are coming. We have to face them with courage. The good news is they won't last, but we will. And I can't tell you how many times in history Christians have really missed the boat on this. In 1420, it was the Taborites. In 1520, it was Thomas Munster. In 1530, it was the rebellion of the Anabaptists. In the 1990s, it was David Koresh in Waco. Over and over again, the greater public has identified Revelation and groups that focus on Revelation with violence and war and armed rebellion. And folks, if you read this book and you come away with a sense that you're being called to armed rebellion, you have really misread this book. Same token, right now we've got people, and I'm not talking about politicians, I'm talking about ministers, The arguments in the political realm, I'm not going to get involved in. But when you hear ministers of the gospel standing behind their pulpits saying that we have a divine obligation to bomb Iran, and they start quoting chapter and verse from Revelation as their justification, they are misusing and distorting the book. There's none of that in there. And there are some very prominent, high-profile ministers who are doing that every week right now. And you recognize their names. And it's wrong. The book of Revelation is not a call to arms. It is a call for patient endurance and faithfulness in the face of persecution. And folks, I got to tell you, embracing that kind of understanding is not going to be popular in a post 9/11 America. You're going to find yourself on the outs with people who may be your friends. Now, once again, I'm not trying to enter into the greater political argument about this now. I'm talking about what does the Bible teach and what is the Christian's responsibility. The beast from the earth, the false prophet. Okay. The futurists call the second beast a false prophet. And by the way, the historicists over the years have identified the false prophet as a pope. And there's a lot of anti-Catholic teaching wrapped up in that understanding. It is also a fact that among the dispensationalists, there are many who argue that the false prophet will be the head of an apostate Roman Catholic Church. Tim LaHaye, Hal Lindsey, among others, buy into this. And then you get into the all this stuff about the mark of the beast. Many of the dispensationalist writers look at this and they worry out loud about a future cashless world economy in which credit and debit numbers are assigned to individuals in place of currency. Without your number, you can't buy or sell. The Antichrist will control the labor market. Don't go there. Simplest solution. Historic premillennial futurists see this second beast more as a concept than a person. One writer suggests that he represents organized religion that's turned evil or that has capitulated to the worship of secular power humanism. The point is that in the end there will be religious apostasy and forced religious practice, which is exactly what was happening in the first century. People were being compelled to burn incense to the emperor, to worship him as a god. And what we're looking at is there will come a time when in order to be a functioning member of society, you're going to have to be willing to do that as well. Now, just as you don't need a literal tattoo to represent God's sealing on your forehead, you don't need a literal tattoo or UPC code or whatever you want to come up with to represent a, quote, mark of the beast, unquote. You know, in John's day, if you want to talk about a Christian who's accepted the mark of the beast, you need only look to whichever member of the church has entered into apostasy and gone and burned incense to the emperor. In that very act of worship, he has the mark of the beast. So this doesn't have to be interpreted in a literal way to have real meaning. And I won't even get to the business of trying to figure out what 666 means. There have been any number of wild ideas, and I guarantee you, from Franklin Delano Roosevelt forward, every president and any number of other powerful political leaders, somebody has come up with a way to figure out how their name can be symbolically represented by 666. It's been done, you just a little bit of imagination, you come up with your own system. And it was Roosevelt, it was Eisenhower, it was Kennedy, it was Johnson, it was Nixon, it was Henry Kissinger. I mean, over and over and over again. So don't get trapped in that nonsense. Remember, numbers in Revelation have symbolic representation, symbolic meaning. The perfect number, the number that represents completeness, is what? 7. What's 6? It's something to fall short. 6 times, 3 sixes is a way of saying it really falls short. What we're looking for, if the false prophet is to be understood as a person, not a trend or a movement or something else, then we're looking for a person whose qualities, whose characteristics, whose character is best described as falling short of the glory of God. What we have here is the religious component of the political first beast. The first beast, the Antichrist, is the political entity. The second beast, the false prophet, is a religious entity. They go hand in hand, arm in arm. When you think about the forehead and the hand as being the place where the beast's mark is placed, the forehead is the part of the body closest to where we think. The hand is the physical representation of our action. So when the mark of the beast is upon you, your thoughts and your actions fall short of God and are in league with the powers of darkness. The beast is from the sea. When we look at the description of the second beast activities, first, there's a strong accent on idolatry. Second, the relationship between the two beasts is like that between the state and a state church. The beast from the sea is a secular political power, while the beast from the earth is a religious institution fostering worship of the first beast. The idolatry in question is thus defined as idolatry of the state. Now, folks, rather than look to Europe or ISIS or China or some other place to find where this beast and where this evil system might have its origins, I would suggest that we live in real danger of having a candidate much closer to home. When I see images, and I've seen them today on the internet, of Jesus draped with an American flag, I would suggest to you that there is an element in our society that is dangerously close to wedding church and state in a very unholy alliance. It is a very real danger. And once again, this is not going to win you points with some of your Christian friends. Because there is a very real, think about it. For most of us, two of our most valued loyalties is our loyalty to God and our loyalty to our country. And I'm as patriotic as the next guy. But as Christians, we have to constantly remember that any state, any nation, any government is at best a blending of good and evil. It is ultimately a part of this world. And as Christians, we have to always hold ourselves just a little bit removed from those secular systems, or we may fall prey to the very thing that John is warning about. When our worship of God and our loyalty to the state get so confused that in a real sense we're worshiping the state, which is what was happening in the first century. And I don't have time to deal with chapter 14 tonight. I'll have to run fast next week. We're out of time. Let's pray. Dear Father, thank you so much for your word. Help us to take it to heart, to take encouragement in the fact that you are our God and that you are our protector, and that whatever may befall us, even temporary pain, is temporary. That we are yours for all eternity. In Jesus' name, amen.